You want to start with Indiana first?
Yeah, we can start with Indiana.
Okay.
Just because, we are Indiana.
Exactly. Indiana. Indiana.
Right. Welcome back, guys. In case you couldn't tell at the beginning there, we're definitely going to be talking about Indiana football. And yes, I did say we because there's now two of us in the studio. So there's me, and then I'm joined with Ethan. So, Ethan, we start off with Indiana football.
Yep.
You're saying the fight song.
It's great. It's we started for 5-0. I mean, first of all, I just want to say thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm excited to be a co-host for at least this semester, hopefully for the rest of the year, for when basketball season comes around. But yeah, 5-0, ranked number 23. I mean, who would have thought that, especially coming in as a preseason poll of 89. I mean, the game was electric. Obviously, we talked about it was Parents' Weekend. And Curtis Rourke, even though the Hoosiers had 3 turnovers on their first 5 drives, they came in strong with 42 points. So it was a pretty big win over Maryland. And I think the rankings really showed that.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that kind of to your point was, even despite the turnovers at the beginning, Indiana and Curtis Rourke, they kept their composure. They didn't panic. They stayed in their lane, and then they just were playing their own game, and they just kept scoring and scoring. And Maryland just, at the end of the game, they just couldn't answer.
Oh, no. And yeah, like you talk about, now they go into a stretch where they're only playing Big Ten teams for the rest of the year. So I think by starting out with Maryland as their second Big Ten team that they're facing and winning it to put themselves 2-0 in the conference, I think that's really huge, and that'll set them up, especially against a harder or an easier team like Northwestern. It's going to really help them build upon that momentum and hopefully extend to 3-0.
Yeah, and then after that Northwestern game is obviously the bye week to prepare for that homecoming game.
Yep.
Against Nebraska, which should be an interesting game because they've got true fresh blood quarterback Dylan Raiola.
Patrick Mahomes copycat.
Yeah, mini Mahomes over there. And that extra week, I think, is definitely going to be beneficial for them. I'm sure they're probably going to be watching a lot of film on him to try to figure out how, especially for the defense, to best apply pressure to him and to contain his ability, because he can launch the ball.
Yeah.
They just got to be able to contain him.
Oh, 1,000%. And when I'm looking at the stats between both Rourke and Raiola, one's a senior, one's a freshman. Raiola is going step for step with Rourke. I mean, he has 2 less touchdowns than Rourke, but they have the same amount of turnovers, and only 100 passing yards separate both of them. I mean, they're both slinging the ball, and I think it's going to be a really good matchup. I mean, you talk about it's homecoming weekend. There's going to be a lot of students there, possibly some families there showing up. It's going to be a good game, but if the crowd is able to show out like Cignetti asks for, especially this weekend and Parents' Weekend, I think the Hoosiers can pull it out.
Yeah, I agree. I think, especially, again, since it's at home, Hoosiers definitely have a chance. Nebraska will probably have some fans there because I think they're kind of a bigger fan base, especially because they've had success in football, so they were kind of able to develop that. I feel like IU is kind of in that development phase right now, just because it's been 57 years since we've been 5-0, so this is the first time that a lot of us have seen this kind of success out of our football program.
And I mean, too, you see Curt Cignetti, I don't know for those who are watching have seen, but he put out messages to all students saying tailgating can wait, studying can wait, be at the game just for 4 quarters, which I think is crazy, but it's also it's a good sign, especially coming from a head coach of an improving football team. It's good to see that he's putting out these messages because he wants to get the recognition that he deserves. And obviously, he comes in as a first-year coach with pretty much not high expectations, right? And they're coming in, and now they're ranked after 5 weeks with Northwestern, Nebraska, Washington, and Michigan coming up, all very winnable games before they host Michigan and go to Ohio State. If they start out 9-0 and beat either Michigan or Ohio State, I think there's a really big chance they can make the playoffs this year.
And not only the playoffs, but Big Ten Conference Championship. If we keep this up, even if we have one loss and that one loss is to Ohio State, we could very well make the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah. 1,000%. I mean, yeah, like you talked about making the Big Ten championship game. I think out of all the Big Ten teams, Indiana's probably got one of the easier schedules just because of their previous seasons and how they've performed. But they've improved so much this year. And if they're able to perform, like you said, the Big Ten championship is very well in contention. And according to ESPN, they have a 40% chance to make the playoffs this year, which is incredible. Like, I would have never thought that coming in. Like, I was always here like, rah, rah, basketball team, right? No, we are here for a football team now. And there's going to be a lot more students, I think, showing out. And I think you saw that at Parents Weekend, or just like throughout the entire season. You see more and more students every single week, no matter who the opponent is. There's always people coming out. And now that it's getting closer to the end of the season, when we eventually build up to that Purdue game where it's going to be an electric atmosphere, it's going to be great to see how many more fans show out and how the Hoosiers will do based off of that.
Yeah, I think that Purdue game is definitely going to be very exciting. I remember my sophomore year when I went to the IU Purdue game that was hosted here, and there was more Purdue fans than there was IU fans in the stands. I think this year it's going to be completely different. I really think that we're going to like show out and there's going to be no one in the stands for Purdue, especially since Purdue is just doing horrible right now.
Terrible.
Just so bad.
I mean, they're 1-3 overall, 0-1 in the conference. I mean, their quarterback Hudson Card, 7 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Like, he's not having a great season. And I mean, when you just put it like stack to stack wise for players and positions, Indiana rolls over them. I mean, you wouldn't really think that, especially coming in towards the beginning of the season. But when you match them up against Purdue, it's just blown over. I mean, we may see like a Notre Dame again coming in and just absolutely wiping Purdue. I mean, they came in winning 66-3. Like, that's crazy to me. Like, I think Indiana has a chance not to do that, maybe to that extent, but they can come in to Memorial Stadium and just absolutely destroy Purdue and give the IU fans what they want to see.
Even though that's unlikely for them to like pull off what Notre Dame did against Purdue, I would love to see that though. That would be so great to see.
Yeah. And even during the Parents Weekend game against Maryland, the announcer even said when they were showing the scoreboards, they emphasized the Nebraska win over Purdue 28-10, and the whole crowd erupted. And that was great to see. I mean, the rivalry between Indiana and Purdue, it's still very much alive, and I can't wait till basketball season where that's going to really start sparking up. You're going to see a lot more fans in Assembly Hall. It's going to be great.
Yeah, I think we're going to be taking over Purdue in football and basketball this year. I mean, we have, obviously for basketball, we have the best transfer class coming in.
Yep.
We're starting to bring in some good freshmen. We still have, we're still going to have Trey Galloway and Malik Renew. Like, we're still going to have like our two of our 3 best players from last year. So I really think this is the year for IU athletics to just show out. Like, it's IU's year, I think.
And it's probably got to be better for you too, since you're a senior. You haven't really seen as much as the success as you wanted to. Coming in as a freshman, it's kind of be like, oh my God, this is nice. We got a good football team. Our basketball team is hopefully going to be preseason ranked. It's good to see this, and hopefully, as I go, it'll be around the same, if not better. So we'll see. But
yeah, so I kind of I saw this struggle, and now like I'm here for the hype.
No, I know it's great. It's great. I'm happy. I'm happy that IU's doing well, and obviously the rankings, just 23 that just blows me away. I mean, I would have never thought that, but it's great to see for IU fans.
Yeah, I mean, even like not just IU, but like Big Ten this past week really showed out in the rankings. I mean, we have Ohio State at 3, Oregon at 6, Penn State at 7, Michigan at 10, USC at 11, IU at 23, and Illinois at 24. So that's 7 teams out of the 25 in the top 25 that are Big Ten conference teams, which is huge. I mean, that was kind of what the Pac-12 did last year. Like, they had like 6-7 teams almost every single week.
Yeah, and I mean, there's 7 ranked teams in the Big Ten, which is more than any other conference so far.
Including the SEC, for those of you that just absolutely love the SEC and worship the SEC.
And especially after watching that Alabama and Georgia game, which we will get to eventually. But yeah, like going back to that, like the Big Ten, this also works out in Indiana's favor, right? They only play two of these ranked teams. I mean, they only play Michigan, which is very beatable, especially at home. Then Ohio State, which obviously it's Ohio State. We don't really expect much, but you never know. There could be an upset in the making. But there's going to be a lot more leniency, I think, for IU, especially when you have all these Big Ten teams that are making the poll. And if they don't make the Big Ten championship, there's probably going to be a little bit more leeway, especially for them if they want to get into the playoffs, since there's so much competition in the Big Ten that if they don't make the game, that they can still make the playoffs because of the competition and what other teams can get in.
Yeah, they could, like you said, if they don't make the Big Ten championship, I could see IU maybe sneaking in at 10 or 11.
Yep.
But I think if IU, even if they lose to Ohio State, if they keep it close enough, I really don't think they're going to be punished by the AP poll. Like, if anything, they might even move up a couple spots depending on whether or not some teams move up or move down that are above them.
Yeah.
Or they could just stay in the same spot. Like, some teams could either jump or IU can jump them without moving.
Yeah. I mean, that's gonna be an electric game, especially at OSU. I mean, they know what's on the line. I mean, if they stay where they are at the 3 in the top 25, they're going all out. I mean, they want to win that game. I mean, if IU is building up to that point where they're undefeated after beating Michigan, they're going to go all out, and they know that's a must-win game.
Yeah.
Because if they lose, IU is going to take over them, I think. I mean, depending on how well they do up until that point, IU, they're going to come in hot. I mean, if they beat Michigan, their momentum is going to be sky high.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
so
defeating
OSU's
last year's
take 'em
national
down.
champions is a big deal.
Yeah.
Even if it's a different roster, like still taking down last year's national champions, I think is huge.
Yeah.
Especially for us.
No, I know. Especially for Indiana fans, we're like, oh, no. Like, oh, yeah, football, basketball, yes. But now it's both, yes. So it's great. But
And also kind of going to the OSU-IU game, like, it could very well be it'll be the clash of the Big Ten Titans if both remain undefeated. If IU remains undefeated, Ohio State's probably still going to be undefeated. So you're going to have two teams that are going to be 10-0 going at it right before Thanksgiving weekend.
yeah. And I mean, OSU, they got a rough schedule. I mean, they got Iowa, then the very next week, they got Oregon, at Oregon.
Yeah, that game's going to be tough. I could see Oregon maybe pulling off an upset, but Oregon's also been kind of shaky at the beginning of the year, so I don't know.
I mean, they got a couple weeks to try and get themselves back into it, but I mean, then they go to Nebraska 2 weeks later, and then they're at Penn State. Like, that's rough. If they're able to pull both those games out, then props to them, and then they're going to host IU, then host Michigan the week after. If they can do that, if they can get up to the point where they face IU and Michigan undefeated, they are definitely making the Big Ten championship, I think. I mean, they're knocking off two of the best teams in the Big Ten in Oregon and Penn State, which are ranked 6 and 7 respectively.
Yeah.
Then you got Indiana. So it's going to be definitely a little bit of a drop-off compared to Penn State and Oregon, but they still have a shot, I think. And I think OSU, if they're able to pull out 3 out of these 4 ranked games, they're going to make the Big Ten championship.
Yeah. And I think if Ohio State pulls off those games as well, you're going to see Oregon move down. You're going to see Penn State probably move down a little bit, which could give IU the opportunity to move up into that like kind of similar area into like the teens, maybe even the top 10. Yeah. So it would be another, like it could possibly be another top 10 matchup for Ohio State towards the end of the year.
It's just going to be harder because Indiana doesn't play Penn State or Oregon, so
yeah.
I feel like the committee's going to automatically assume and be like, oh, they don't play each other, so let's just give it to Oregon and Penn State because overall they're better and they got the better team and Indiana has the easier schedule. But it all depends on how the results are. Like if it's a blowout, then there's definitely going to be a fall off. If it's close, they're going to be kept around the same. It all depends on the result.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so I think let's move into, I kind of want to talk about the ACC.
Yeah.
Even though like it's a little chaotic. I mean, I think Miami is definitely on top of that conference, but Clemson has started to really show out this year. I mean, they started off with the horrible loss against Georgia at the beginning of the year where they only scored 3 points. But ever since then, they've just been crushing their opponents. It looks almost like they're playing angry.
Yeah. I mean, they're definitely mad. I mean, the amount of hatred they got after getting blown out by 31, especially at home, that's crazy. I mean, their first 4 games, all of the games that they've played have been at home. So they have a lot more road games coming up ahead, but they only have one ranked opponent left on their schedule, and that's Louisville, who's 22.
Yeah, since Notre Dame beat them, they got knocked down. But Louisville still, I think they're still a solid team, but I don't think they're going to beat Clemson.
No, I don't think so either. And they're going to Clemson. So yeah, like you said, I don't think Clemson is another loss in their sight. I mean, maybe a little bit of a bold take, but I think they go 11-1 and win the ACC.
I think they could definitely. I think it's definitely going to be between Miami and Clemson for the ACC championship. I mean, like you said, Clemson has a pretty easy schedule. And Miami, I don't think they have as easy of a schedule, but they've just been so dominant besides that Virginia Tech game that I just don't see them losing up until that point.
Yeah.
But I think Clemson winning the ACC would be the ACC conference's best chance to have 2 teams in the 12-team playoff.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at Miami's schedule right now, as you talk about having a similar schedule, they have a very similar schedule to Clemson, actually. I mean, their only ranked game for the rest of the season is Louisville, again, like we talked about. And then they go on to play Florida State, who obviously we know the biggest disappointment so far this year.
Yeah.
Then they have Georgia Tech, who was ranked. So I think their unranked matchups are a little bit harder than what Clemson's are. But just looking at the schedule sheet, you only see one ranked number on there, and that's Louisville. So the schedules are definitely very similar, and I think it's setting up, like you said, that it's going to be Miami and Clemson in the ACC championship.
Yeah. Like, I think with Miami, even though, like, and some of those, like, rankings could change. Like, some of those teams that Miami could face down the line could pop into the rankings at, like, if they do, though, it would be, like, 23, 24, 25.
Yep.
But otherwise, like, besides Louisville, no other ranked opponents.
I mean, like, just looking at the ACC, I mean, one team that stands out, I mean, they haven't really played anyone except UNC. It's Duke.
Yeah, Duke's one of the last few remaining undefeated teams.
Yeah. Like, they haven't been talked about as much. I mean, they haven't played as many good teams as some of these other undefeated teams have had, but they got Miami and Georgia Tech as their 2 hardest games coming up. So if they're able to pull out one of those, even though Georgia Tech isn't ranked, but they're going to Georgia Tech, they have a very good shot to get up there in the standings as well. I mean, I'm not saying that's going to get them to the ACC championship.
Or the playoffs.
Yeah. But they can make a good name for themselves this year. And if they can go 10-2, 9-3, maybe even 11-1 if they just lose to Miami for the rest of the season, that would be incredible for a Duke fan. I mean, they would be in the same position as an IU fan, right? Their basketball team's incredible. Football team's not so great, but they're both in the same spot right now. So if they're able to do that and fill out the rest of their schedule just like IU is trying to do, both fan bases, I think, would be pretty happy with how their season turned out.
Yeah, I agree. Except I think Duke has kind of had glimpses of success in the past, like within the past 2 years at least. I mean, I remember, I think it was either last year or the year before, but like both Duke and Kansas were undefeated when they were going up against each other. And both of those schools, kind of like IU, are known as basketball schools and not football schools.
Exactly. And you're talking about like Duke last year and stuff. They had a bunch of losses. I mean, one game that stood out was definitely the Clemson game, which at that point they were ranked at 9. And they won 28-7. Like, that was an incredible win. And obviously Riley Leonard, who we talked about, now the Notre Dame quarterback who is flourishing, except that NIU loss. And then another one was that loss to North Carolina, 47-45 in double overtime. That was an incredible game to watch. I mean, that was one of the best games that year. But yeah, like Duke, obviously they're improving, right? And we talk about how both basketball schools, Duke, IU, but Duke is coming in strong. I mean, they lost to UNC last year. Obviously, they won on Saturday, 21-20. Even though it was close, a win's a win. So now they're trying to build upon that. And obviously, losing their quarterback, obviously, it's been working. I mean, Murphy's been showing out. And we're going to see how he performs against these better teams coming up, obviously, with Georgia Tech, FSU, who can, I don't know, they can get hot at any moment, really. And then Miami, but we'll see.
I mean, Duke's also in a very interesting situation because they not only lost their quarterback from last year, but their head coach is now currently the head coach at Texas A&M. So now they not only have a new quarterback, but they also have a new coach as well, which affects the dynamic of the team. I mean, even just like looking at a team like Washington, who saw, kind of like Michigan, saw lots of success last year. Their head coach leaves. They lost a lot of people to the draft, or like people transferred because Kalen DeBoer went to Alabama. So some of them like followed him over there. They bring in a new coach, Jed Fish, and Washington, kind of like Michigan, even though Michigan only has one loss, I feel like this year for them has been kind of disappointing. Washington has had more losses, but I think like just their season has been a disappointment.
Yeah. And I mean, like just looking at the ACC now, I mean, one team that was talked about for maybe 2 days and then they got dropped out of the rankings and now they're nowhere to be found is Boston College.
Yes.
I mean, we talk about the win against Florida State, which was just the spiraling down for them from there. Then they go on to lose against Missouri.
That was a close game, though.
Yeah, they're 4-1, right? I'm not saying they should be ranked, but they're not talked about at all after being dropped. I mean, that's like the same with a bunch of other teams. I mean, you have all the powerhouses in the SEC and the Big Ten, whatever. But there's some of these like sneaky teams that kind of build themselves into the rankings. And one of them was Boston College at one point, and it's the same with NIU, right? They were in there, now they're not talked about at all. It's been 2 weeks, whatever.
Yeah, NIU doesn't. I'm looking at the AP poll right now. NIU doesn't have any votes. Boston College still got 18 votes in the AP poll, which is above teams like Oklahoma State and Iowa and South Carolina and Kentucky, who beat Ole Miss.
I have to disagree with the amount of respect Kentucky's getting. I mean, they beat Ole Miss, number 6, and that dropped Ole Miss significantly. Then they only lose to Georgia by 1, 13-12. They deserve a little bit more respect, in my opinion.
I would have put Kentucky at 24, to be honest.
Okay.
Like in the rankings, just mainly because of the games they've been playing. But at the same time, like I feel like they're the Iowa of the SEC, where they're more of a defensive focused team. Like their offense, it takes a lot for their offense to really get going, but their defense is really good at locking teams down, like locking down the other team's offense down.
Yeah.
Which I think like does not get talked about enough.
I mean, yeah, well, like for now we're going to like switch over to the rankings. I think one team that I think that just keeps popping into my mind that's overrated has got to be Michigan. And I'll say why, because Michigan, they beat a 2-2 Minnesota team by 3
points.
Yet they still moved up 2 spots. Minnesota, obviously, not a great team, not a football team whatsoever. And to be outscored by 18 in the fourth quarter, 21-3 by this Minnesota team, that's a little bit concerning. And I mean, you talk about Orji, he went 10 for 18 for 86 yards with 1 TD and 1 pick. That's a bad game for him.
Yeah,
and
less than 100 yards is kind of sad for a starting quarterback in college football.
Especially if you're a top 10 ranked team, you would expect at least over 100, if not maybe 150. But they're relying on that run game. But a couple of the teams that are on their schedule, like we talked about, IU especially, their front 7 is good. I mean, led by Aiden Fisher, they got a lot of good stars on that defense. And when they come in, they can't rely on that run game.
They're going to have to throw the ball.
They're going to have to throw the ball. So the adjustments are going to have to be made. And if they're being outscored 21-3 in fourth quarters like this for the rest of the season, or similar to that, they're not going to be a top 10 team. And the chance of them not making the playoffs, that's going to start rising. And I think fans are going to be a little bit surprised of how the playoffs shake off because of the way Michigan plays. But only time will tell with how they do and what their adjustments are for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think other teams that come to mind to me that are a little bit overrated, I mean, USC is not as overrated as Michigan, I don't think, but I still think that, like, I mean, they went up against a, like, very mediocre at best Wisconsin at home, and then they were barely hanging. They were losing in the first half, and then they they obviously outscored them in the second half, but like losing to a Wisconsin team like that in the first half, I feel like that should have been noted more in the AP poll.
Yeah.
And then there's LSU, who's just sitting pretty over there at 13, even though they've had one of the easiest schedules besides their loss to USC.
And I feel like you can also make the case, though, that IU has had such an easy schedule as well. But
we've been dominating everyone.
Yeah. But like going back to the USC point, I think the reason why they were kept where they were, or the reason why they moved up, is because they outscored them 28-0. And I think, like you said, the adjustments are huge, right? You don't really see that with Michigan. I mean, even though they lost to Michigan, they definitely deserve to be below them until Michigan loses and USC wins in a certain week. But being able to outscore Wisconsin 28-0 in the second half, that's pretty significant. And I think that's why they were kept there, even though they were losing at half by an incredible margin. That's why they were able to keep their spot at 11. But until Michigan loses, I think USC is always going to be behind them. But the LSU point, I completely agree. I mean, they're 4-1. They lost to USC week 1. The big test is going to be in 2 weeks when they face Ole Miss. I think that's going to be a big teller. I mean, for the past 4 weeks, they haven't played anyone, right?
Yeah.
Their last
besides
game,
USC,
which they lost.
Yeah.
And their last game was against South Alabama, where they won 42-10. Now they're going to host Ole Miss. So there's a lot of pressure, especially at home, where if they don't win this game, they're going to be dropped significantly because they haven't really played anyone, and this is just going to be their second-ranked opponent all season. And they got hard opponents coming up. I mean, they got Texas A&M, then Alabama, then Oklahoma to finish the season. It's going to be rough for LSU. They got to start pulling out games here left and right if they want to stay within that top 15.
LSU might be able to steal this away from Ole Miss because unlike Ole Miss has a game, whereas LSU has the bye week before their game against Ole Miss.
Yep.
So Ole Miss could either take more time and prepare for LSU and risk possibly underestimating South Carolina and lose to them. And South Carolina has proved to be a very underrated team. I mean, they're not even in the AP poll, surprisingly. Like they only got 8 votes. They are tied with Oklahoma State, which is kind of crazy to me because one of their losses was against LSU.
Yeah.
But it was really close. It pretty much the refs controlled that game because both teams just kept turning the ball over. LSU could also just completely lose all momentum with the bye week, even though like we've said, they haven't really played anyone besides USC.
Yeah. You talk about the LSU loss. I'm looking at the Kentucky win.
Yeah, that too.
That's crazy. I mean, you talk about Kentucky. They beat Ole Miss. Then they only lose to Georgia by 1, but then they get blown out by South Carolina at Kentucky by 25. I think what's holding them back from the rankings is their schedule. Obviously, it's based off of how they've played, and I think they've played phenomenal. I mean, they just beat Akron 50-7. But they're 5 out of their next 6 games are against ranked opponents. 12 Ole Miss, 1 Alabama, 19 Oklahoma, 25 A&M, and then 9 Mizzou. And then their last game is at Clemson. This is going to be rough. I mean, I think they got one of the hardest schedules remaining in the SEC, if not in all of college football. So I think up to this point, they've played great. But if they want to try and get themselves into a position where they get votes and possibly into the top 25, they got to steal a couple of these ranked games, especially
they need to win
against these top 15 opponents like Ole Miss and Alabama.
I could definitely see them beating Ole Miss.
Yep.
I mean, if I'm being completely honest, like Ole Miss before playing Kentucky hadn't really played anyone, and Kentucky was kind of like their version of like our Maryland game, where that was like wasn't going to be their biggest test of the year, but it was like their biggest test up to this point.
Yep.
And then they lose.
And I think too, like the Indiana Maryland game too, like 3 turnovers in the first 5 drives. That looked a little concerning from Rourke, considering he had no turnovers in the first 4 games, and then he has 2 right away in the first quarter. It's like, what's going on?
Yeah.
But I think, like I said earlier, like the adjustments are key. And I think over the course of the game, Rourke was able to settle himself down. Cignetti kind of calmed him down. His receivers were able to make some plays for him. I mean, you talk about the jump balls from Surratt and Cooper. They both stepped up tremendously. The adjustments that are made by these teams are going to be so important to the outcomes of these bigger games. And I think it's going to come down to a lot of the coaching, but obviously how the players in game are going to like feed off of that. And I think a big change is definitely going to be crowd noise and the way the coaches,
stadium pulse.
The stadium pulse. I mean, talk about it. I mean, the college football game I play it on PlayStation. That's rough. I mean, going to Penn State, oh my God, my screen is shrinking like crazy. But it's gonna be important how coaches adjust throughout the game. And I think having Cignetti is great for Indiana. I mean, he brings all of the hype, and I think he showed it to all the students right away when they brought everyone to the stadium. But yeah, it's all going to be about adjustments.
Yeah, when he sent the letter, like when I saw that on Barstool, I had never seen a coach do that before.
Yeah.
I loved it. Like, I thought it was great. Like, it just shows like he's not only like building the football program up, but he's also like trying to bring in like a culture. Like, he's trying to help not only build up our football team, but also like grow Indiana's football culture and make it more of a football school than it has been.
Yeah.
To hopefully bring more consistent success. Because you look at programs like Michigan and Ohio State, I mean, you could even like say like Notre Dame too, like in Alabama, like all those schools have a huge culture built around their football programs. And that's part of the reason why there's so much success. I mean, they'll bring people, like some people, like the coaches, when they bring in their players, they'll be like, you get to come in and play like during the whiteout game if you're going to Penn State, or like for Tennessee, like you get to do you get to run out with the band in the shape of a T, or in Clemson, you get to run down the hill of their stadium. Like there's stuff like that brings players in.
Mm-hmm. And two, like now you think about Cignetti and his history. He was the coach of JMU, right? And the amount of people he brought with him to IU, it's crazy. He brought so many coaches. He brought so many players, including Elijah Surratt, who's been incredible. Looking at JMU, they have votes. I mean, they're not in the top 25 right now, but they have votes. They're 4-0. They beat North Carolina 70-50 in probably the highest scoring game we're going to see all season. They don't play one ranked opponent at all this year. Their next game is against UL Monroe. Then they play Coastal Carolina. It's just not great teams. If JMU had Cignetti and all these players and coaches for just this year,
they would easily be ranked.
They would be ranked, and they would probably be the G5 team that would get the 12th seed, I think. If they go undefeated, it looked very doable, and that Sunbelt Conference, it's not as strong as some of these other conferences. But they could have pulled out the 12th seed as the G5 champion. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of competition with Boise State and how hard their schedule has been, but how well they've been doing. But JMU, they are playing well. I mean, their past two games, they've scored 133 points combined. Like, that is nuts. I mean, they had 63 against Ball State, 70 against North Carolina. They've been playing outstanding.
Not to mention that this is their first year as, like, a true Division I program.
Yeah. Exactly. And
like that's how much Cignetti won over at JMU. He like because of the winning culture that he had over there, that helped bring JMU into the D1 arena.
Yeah.
And they're still seeing success because of the influence that he had on their football team.
And you can just see it, right? Like you can see Cignetti in the way he gets people involved. Like he wants to bring the culture together, and obviously it's very visible, right? I mean, you didn't really see this, but for like me, they brought all the freshmen to the Memorial Stadium on one of the days during Welcome Week, and all of a sudden he comes sprinting out with three of the players, one of them being Aiden Fisher, and he's like hyping up the crowd. He's getting crazy. The whole freshman class, they're going nuts, and he gets a mic and he's screaming into it. And we're all getting excited. He's getting us involved. He's like, oh, yeah, no, you guys need to show up. We're going to change this program around. Like, it's incredible how much he's lived up to the hype. And I think just because of what he's done and who he's brought with him, IU's going to be set up for the future really well.
Yeah, even after he leaves, whenever that is. Like, I don't know if he plans to stay long term or not, but either way, like, he's already done so much to change our football program that, like, to the point where we could still see success, like, after he leaves.
And yeah, it depends, like, who leaves with him too, right?
Yeah.
Like, he brought all these people, but will some of them stay? Will some of them follow him? We don't know.
I really hope he stays here long term, because I think that would, like, if he does, I mean, considering the success that he already has right now in his first year, like, we could very well be considered like a Michigan or Ohio State, because he, like, when he coached at Bama, he was one of the recruiting coaches over there. He was a wide receiver coach and the recruit, like, one of the main recruiters. He was the one bringing people into Alabama, like, towards the beginning of the Nick Saban era. And now we have him here at IU. So we're going to be, like, he's going to be bringing people in, like, not just people from the transfer portal that are maybe seeking a fifth year or whatever, but he's also going to be able to bring in high schoolers, like, good high schoolers from not just, like, from Indiana, but, like, from out of state, like maybe Texas or Florida, like states that are known to produce great footballers in high school. Because, I mean, like, some states, like, are more competitive in some sports than others. Like, Indiana, like, competitive in basketball and swimming. Illinois, kind of also competitive in swimming. But, like, Texas is known for, like, football. So is Florida. Florida's also kind of a swimming school, too, like, or a swimming state as well. So that could, like, we could be bringing some of those people from the football states, bringing them to IU Bloomington, Kurt Signetti and company developing them, and then we just build, like, this program that we're going to have is going to be so good.
Yeah, and, like, just moving on, like, from Signetti and stuff, like, one coach that really stands out and you talk about, like, the whole transfer portal thing and bringing recruits is Colorado.
I was actually going to go there, too, because, like, the move that Signetti made, like, where he went from JMU to here, it kind of reminded me of Colorado and Deion Sanders bringing, like, his entire coaching staff, like, a lot of his players from Jacksonville State over to Colorado. And that's basically what Kurt Signetti did this year with us.
I mean, you talk about, too, like, Coach Prime with Colorado. I mean, they're doing great right now. They're 4-1. Their only loss was to Nebraska in week 2. But you talk about, like, the whole recruiting thing and bringing people in and, like, true freshmen. He relies heavily on that transfer portal.
Yeah.
And we know that. Once these guys leave, like Travis Hunter, who's obviously a Heisman frontrunner, and then Shadur Sanders, the quarterback, it's going to be tough to find people to fill in those gaps, especially since Hunter is a 2-position player. He's the CB1 and the wide receiver 1 for that team.
Yeah. They're going to have to find one person that's, like, as good as Travis Hunter at one position and one person that's as good as him in the other position.
Yeah. You're not going to find someone who's as good as Travis Hunter that can play 2 positions like that. Like, that's incredible.
He's one of a kind.
Yep. 1,000%. And I mean, I think they did them a little disrespectfully in the rankings this week. I mean, I don't think they should be ranked, but I think they deserve to get more votes, especially after beating UCF 48-21.
Yeah, I think they only got 1 vote.
Yeah, that's I think they deserve a little bit more than that. But I think that's all going to be tested in 10 days when they host Kansas State. I mean, we're going to see what they do up to that point, because obviously they're ranked 20th right now. And then they go to Arizona, who's been hot. And they're the first team off the ranked list after beating Utah 23-10, which obviously Utah, very good team. But
they need their starting quarterback, though.
Yes.
Otherwise, Utah, they're not going to do anything this year.
Yeah, and Colorado does play Utah towards the end of the season. They play them as their third to last game. But besides that, in Kansas State, they're not really playing anyone except Arizona and Texas Tech, who they've been a little bit hot too. I mean, they're also 4-1, but yeah, Colorado is just another team that reminded me of what you were saying with the whole thing about Signetti and what the culture he's brought to IU. But now it's more about Coach Prime and bringing it to Colorado. And he has these such high-value NIL players with Shadur and Hunter. It's just, it's incredible.
Honestly, like Colorado, their one loss this year was to Nebraska. So right now, they're undefeated in Big 12 play.
Yeah.
They very well, I mean, like you were saying, like their schedule isn't too bad besides like the last maybe 3 games. They could very well sneak into the Big 12 championship and possibly win it and then get themselves a playoff spot. And not just a playoff spot, but a bye in the playoff, which would be huge, especially after last year where it kind of ended in disappointment for Colorado last year. But it looks like they kind of fixed some adjustments after kind of a rough start with the Nebraska game. Like it looks like they're finally catching their stride. It's a matter of Travis Hunter. Can he keep up what he's doing consecutively week after week after week?
And yeah, just looking at the Big 12 overall, there's only 3 teams that are 2-0 in conference play, and that's BYU, Colorado, and Texas Tech. BYU has been incredible.
They came out of nowhere.
Yeah. I don't know what's happening. I mean, they blew out Kansas State 38-9, and then they beat Baylor narrowly 34-28. Oh my God, I'm sorry. I'm very hungry right now.
Same.
But yeah, BYU, they've been outstanding. I mean, they're ranked 17th right now. I think they're one of the teams that are going to get into the Big 12 championship. I mean, they only have Utah as their sole ranked team that they have to play later in the season.
And that's going to be at the end of the year, I think, isn't it?
It's going to be their 4th to last game. That's like in the middle of what they have left. But besides that, they have a very winnable schedule. I mean, you talked about Oklahoma State, how they just got deranked too. But after back-to-back losses to Utah and Kansas State, it's going to be a pretty easy schedule for BYU. And if they're able to keep this up and keep winning and even beat Utah and go undefeated, they got a playoff spot in the bag. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, especially if they just win the Big 12, that's an easy top 4 spot in the playoffs.
Yeah. I mean, I think at least for BYU this week, they have a bye week. But in 2 weeks, they play Arizona, who just beat Utah. And I think that Arizona could low-key sneak up on BYU, if it's at BYU, probably not. But if it's at Arizona, I think they could possibly sneak out a win against BYU, maybe.
And yeah, like Arizona's final ranked game is against BYU. They've already played Kansas State and Utah. They're
1-1 right now in ranked games.
They lost to Kansas State and then they beat Utah. And at the time, Utah is a better ranked team than Kansas State was.
Yeah.
So,
and they played Kansas State on the road too.
Yeah. Well, they played Utah on the road as well. So it's going to be interesting. And they also play BYU on the road, which kind of sucks at the way it works out. I mean,
wow.
all 3 of their ranked games are away, which kind of sucks. But then the week after BYU, they host Colorado. That is going to be a big game, I think.
For both teams.
Yeah. Even though none of them are ranked, they're both receiving votes. And by that time, they're going to be trying to push to get into that AP poll. That's going to be a big determination to see who gets the edge and what the committee wants to do with that. Because even though none of the teams are ranked, it's still going to be a big game, especially for how well-known Colorado is with who they have as their coach, their players. But then Arizona, as hot as they are right now, and depending on what happens with the BYU game, if they win that, coming off of a hot win against BYU, they got the momentum all in their favor, especially going home and hosting Colorado. It's going to be huge.
Not to mention also, this is going to impact the Big 12 conference standings a lot. I mean, not just because they're both Big 12 teams, but because both of these teams fighting for playoff spots. And right now, since both of them are one-loss teams, like Arizona's one loss within the conference, Colorado's one loss overall, undefeated in the conference. But both teams, I think their only path into the college football playoff is if they win the Big 12 championship.
And also, too, just like one other team we haven't even mentioned is Iowa State. I mean, they're 16th right now. They're 4-0. they don't play another ranked game until their final 2 games of the season, where they go to Utah and then they host Kansas State. They beat Iowa already 20-19, and then they just shut out Houston and blew out Arkansas State 52-7. They got a pretty doable schedule with Baylor, West Virginia, and then UCF as their next 3 games. I mean, it's very doable for them. Like, they could also make a push depending on how they do against Utah and Kansas State. Obviously, they're going to be very tired because that's a 2-week span, no bye weeks in between that at all. But if they end up winning 1, possibly 2 of those games, they could get a Big 12 championship in their sight as well.
Yeah, Big 12 is looking really chaotic this year. I mean, which is kind of crazy considering that, like, Oklahoma and Texas left the Big 12, and I think if they were in that conference, it'd be, I mean, I guess it would be a little less chaotic, but I mean, underneath them, it would have been just super chaotic.
It would just be a fight for that second spot in that Big 12 championship. Texas would be in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, a lot of the recognition right now is put on the Big 10 and the SEC, which is normal, right? I mean, the SEC has 6 ranked teams, the Big 10 is 7. Then you got the Big 12, which I haven't personally been hearing many people talk about, but it's been getting better. And even though, like you talked about, they lost Texas, they lost Oklahoma, it's still very well chaotic. And the winner of that, they're going to get a top 4 seed no matter what. So it just all depends on how it all shakes out. And it's going to be very hectic to see all of these ranked matchups in conference play. So we just need to wait and see how that goes. And for Iowa State, that's going to come in at the end of November. So we got to see how these other teams perform before Iowa State takes them on.
Yeah. I think kind of going off of that, because we're almost out of time, but we'll kind of go into the SEC with this, but we got to talk about, like, what do we think the 12-team playoff is going to look like? For me, I have Bama at 1, Ohio State at 2, Miami at 3, and BYU at 4 for those Power 4 conference spots. Then I have Texas at 5, Oregon at 6, Penn State at 7, Georgia at 8, Tennessee at 9, Indiana at 10, Clemson at 11, and then Boise State rounding out the top 12.
Okay, so it's interesting because you don't have Michigan on yours. I don't have Indiana on mine, even though I go to IU. I don't know. It doesn't feel right. Like it's like it's too good to be true. But I'm gonna have to agree with you with the first 3: Alabama, Ohio State, and Miami. I think those are gonna be the champions for the SEC, Big Ten, and ACC. I have Kansas State. The reason why is they only have one more ranked game, which is at the end of the season. So they're going to have a lot of time to build up to that point, and they're going to be a little bit rested for the Big 12 championship if they get there, because they only play one more ranked team. And I feel like if you're only building up to that point, you got a lot of time to, like, settle down, just focus on that game, and then go heavy on the Big 12 championship, which is why I think they're going to be the 4. I got Texas 5. I got Tennessee 6. Then I got Oregon 7, Georgia 8, Penn State 9, Missouri 10, which I feel like that could be mixed up a little bit just based off how they do for the rest of the season. But so far, they've been doing well, even though the games have been super close, but they're still winning. Michigan at 11, which that could very well change in November when they play Oregon, Indiana, and Ohio State, 3 ranked games in the Big Ten. Then I agree, Boise State as the highest G5 champion. So, yeah, that rounds out my top 12.
Yeah, I think, like, I put Indiana in there because I think Indiana's going to beat Michigan, and I think that hopefully will be enough to at least get them into that 10 spot or 11 spot. But I think for Michigan also, that is definitely going to be a crucial game, because if Michigan loses to Indiana, they're definitely out of contention. Because it'll be their second loss. But also, like, they're probably not going to be able to get into the Big Ten Conference Championship because that's going to be a Big Ten loss for them.
Yeah.
Assuming that they win the other ranked games on their schedule, which they're probably not going to beat Ohio State. So that's going to put them at, like, 2 losses in the Big Ten. And then Oregon. They play Oregon, which they're probably going to lose that game too. So that's 3 losses right there in the Big Ten. So I think they're definitely not going to get that conference championship spot, but they're also not going to get into that top 12 because that'll be too many losses assuming they lose to Indiana, like assuming they lose to all those teams. But if they win, like I think they could be in that I think you had them at 10, right?
Michigan, I have them at 11.
Okay, yeah. That they would get that 11 spot probably.
Yeah, it all depends on how November goes. November is going to be the biggest month for a lot of the teams I have in my 12-team playoff prediction, but it all depends how these interconference games go. I mean, especially for Michigan, they probably have the biggest amount of pressure put on them, especially as the previous champion. But it all comes down to what they can do and how Orji can honestly throw the ball. I mean, the running game isn't going to help them as much now in November. I mean, they play some good teams that have some good front sevens. Orji's going to have to sling it.
And Big Ten is known for their front sevens.
Yeah,
I think.
And he's got to learn how to throw the ball now, and especially in November, he's going to have to step up big. I mean, filling in for J.J. McCarthy, who's obviously known as the handoff master, but he could throw the ball. Hopefully Orji can too. It just all depends how he plays and how the connection is with his receivers.
And we just haven't really seen it yet either.
No, not at all.
So we can't assume that he's going to throw the ball if we haven't really seen him throw the ball.
I mean, he's going to be forced to if they keep running the ball and they're getting scored on every drive. Yeah. I mean, like we talked about, getting outscored 21-7 against Minnesota. That's scary. So by that time, you're going to have to be throwing that ball if that's going to happen to you every game, especially against these ranked Big Ten opponents.
Yeah. And also the SEC, I kind of want to talk a little bit about the SEC before we sign off. I think there's definitely going to be a lot of SEC teams in the top 12, for this playoff. It's really just a matter of who. I think we can agree that Bama is probably going to be in, especially after that win against Georgia to start off their season. Georgia, it's going to be hard to say whether or not they get in because they have to win out the remainder of their schedule.
They have to beat Texas.
Yeah,
that's the biggest game for them.
If they don't beat Texas, I'm not sure if they make it in because then you've got Tennessee who could be undefeated at that point. Missouri could maybe be undefeated at that point, and they could steal Georgia's spot possibly. Georgia keeps looking bad. But
I would say they would have to win 2 out of their last 3 ranked games. I think Texas, Tennessee, and Ole Miss, 2, 4, and 12. I think they have to win 2 of those. I mean, they already beat Clemson, which we have to keep that in mind. So they're 1-1 in ranked play. If they go 2-1 in their last 3 ranked games, I think they can get a spot. But it just depends on how the other 3 teams do. I mean, I don't see Texas losing up until that point. I don't see Tennessee losing. Ole Miss, they're very spotty in between here and there. Yeah. So we'll see what happens with them. But they've got to win 2 out of their last 3 ranked games.
And that's going to be hard. I mean, if Georgia looks like the way they did in the first half against Bama, where Carson Beck is throwing pick after pick after pick and giving the opposing team great field position to score, that was the key, I think, to Alabama's victory against them was that their defense was able to get them good field position and keep Georgia's defense on the field.
Yeah. And I mean, he threw 3 touchdowns, 3 picks that game. Those were his first 3 interceptions on the season. And I think it's starting to shed light on Carson Beck and the Georgia team of what they're capable of. And if they don't really have turnovers until they have big games like the ones against Alabama, the ones like Tennessee and Ole Miss, it's going to start to show the committee especially and be like, oh, they can't really perform in these high-pressure situations.
Yeah.
They're going to be booted. So that's why I said they got to win 2 out of their last 3 ranked games. But that all depends on how everything else shakes on the SEC. I don't really see Alabama losing, especially after beating Georgia. They're hot. Ryan Williams is unbelievable, the 17-year-old phenom.
Insanely good.
And then Jalen Milroe, his Heisman run has been incredible so far this year. I mean, he had 117 yards on the ground, 2 touchdowns.
I feel like he does better every single game he plays.
Yeah. And it's crazy. Obviously, people hate it because it's a quarterback award. And in my personal belief, I think Travis Hunter deserves it as of right now because of what he's done in the big plays he's made for Colorado.
If
But
it's based
Jalen
on
Milroe,
impact, if it's based on
Yes.
impacts, then I would absolutely give it to Travis Hunter.
But Jalen Milroe has been outstanding. And the way he's been able to build his connections with his receivers, especially if they're like 17 years old, Ryan Williams, he's building these connections and getting them more involved into the offense. That's unbelievable. Like what he's done to Alabama to help improve them and now get them as the 1 seed or as ranked number 1 has been incredible. So we'll see what happens with them towards the end of the year, but things are looking really bright for Alabama.
Yeah, I agree. Especially even with the, I guess, departure of Nick Saban and the arrival of Kalen DeBoer, I was a little nervous about how Alabama was going to perform, a little bit skeptical, just because I feel like the coaching styles are different.
Yeah.
But Kalen DeBoer also has just won, kind of like Curt Cignetti, like he's just won everywhere he's gone.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
the guy wins. Like, just like Curt Cignetti, like he wins. So I was like, Alabama will probably at least have a 10-win season at minimum.
And looking at the rest of their schedule, they have 4 ranked games left: Tennessee, Mizzou, LSU, and Oklahoma. I think out of these, I think they definitely beat Mizzou. I mean, they host them. They haven't looked as great. We talked about a little bit. I think Oklahoma, I think, is going to be rough.
Is it at Oklahoma?
It's at OU.
Okay, yeah.
So that's going to be rough. You know how electric that atmosphere is.
And they've played each other like within the past 10 years a few times.
Yeah, exactly. But if Jalen Milroe is playing like the way he is, I'm not really scared. Like, Jalen Milroe, he has shown that he can perform in high-pressure situations. But then you got LSU and Tennessee both away. I can see them losing one of the games.
Probably Tennessee.
Yes. But since they beat Georgia, they have a little bit of cushion compared to Georgia, where now they have to win after losing to a lower seeded team, even though Alabama is Alabama and their history has just been tremendous.
Yeah. And if Georgia stays in that top 5, they're not really going to move that much. They're definitely going to stay above Georgia for sure. So they'd at least move down to the 4 spot at max.
Yeah, we'll see how the SEC piles up. I mean, there's going to be a lot of interplay competition here. I mean, Tennessee, obviously, they are lighting things up. I mean, we talk about Tennessee. They just beat Oklahoma by 10. They blew out Kent State 71-0. Then NC State 51-10, who was ranked at that time, by the way, and Chattanooga 69-3. They have 2 ranked games left. They got Alabama and Georgia.
I think Tennessee can beat Georgia.
Yeah.
I really do. I mean,
at Georgia, but the way they've been playing,
they're hot right now.
They got the easiest schedule out of the 3, Alabama, Georgia, and them. They could sneak their way up there if Alabama starts to crumble at some point. Like, they could be an SEC title contender, yeah. So it all depends on how Alabama performs in their stretch of ranked games, but it's also how Tennessee can perform against Alabama at home and then at Georgia in November.
Yeah. I mean, we're probably only going to see one undefeated SEC team. I honestly don't know who that's going to be. Just after the way that the conference has kind of showed itself a little bit, especially after Kentucky, beating Ole Miss and almost beating Georgia. I think if Kentucky is on any of their schedules, easily could be a dark horse and could pull off some kind of crazy upset like they did with Ole Miss.
Everything's up for grabs at this point. I mean, it's too early in the season to determine who's going to get what spot, what the champions are going to be for the conferences. It's too early. We got to wait for these bigger games to happen, and I think one of the bigger ones is going to be obviously Alabama, Tennessee. I mean, that's going to determine a lot in terms of what the SEC standings are going to be, what the poll rankings are going to be, what the committee thinks. That's going to be huge. So we got to see how Tennessee performs in that game, especially having the easiest schedule out of those 3 big dog teams. So we'll see.
We'll see what happens. I think it'll be fun, really fun to watch. I mean, one of the things that I just absolutely love about college football is that it gets harder every single week.
Yes, and no matter who the opponent is.
It really doesn't matter who the opponent is. I mean, it could be like a rivalry game, like Florida State and Miami, that's a in-state rivalry game. But Florida State, just because it's a rival, could pull off a weird upset for no reason at all. Just because they're playing Miami. That's it. That's the only reason they could maybe pull off an upset there.
But Yeah, like especially for these ranked teams, like for IU especially, I'm going to go back to them. Since they're in the ranked poll now, they have a lot of pressure to keep winning, especially they don't have ranked games until Michigan when they host them and then at Ohio State. So if they want to stay in these rankings, they got to beat all these opponents going up into those games to the point where they have a cushion and they can stay in that top 25. But like you said, even these like higher ranked teams like Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, they got easier opponents like Florida, like Mississippi State. But you got to win those games. Otherwise, you're going to start sliding down those rankings, and that's going to give other teams a chance to push ahead of you, and they're going to stay there while they have easy schedules and they have to be easy opponents.
Yeah. Like, I mean, you see like some teams like Boston College, like they have a history of being one of those teams that like you kind of underestimate a little bit. Like, I mean, just because I lived kind of up by the South Bend area, like about an hour away, like I'm kind of a big Notre Dame guy also.
Yep.
But Boston College is always one of those teams that Notre Dame would underestimate, and then Boston College would either like it'd be really close, or Boston College would somehow pull off a win, and that would always just crush us.
Like college football, anything can happen now. Like, I mean, we saw it with NIU Notre Dame. That was just the start, and then we saw that one play touchdown on Alabama, Georgia with Ryan Williams. Like, anything is possible in college football. And I think we're going to start to see that slowly within the Big 12, the Big 10, the SEC. Anything could happen. And I think week to week, our predictions are going to heavily change based off of results. So you can't really make a projection until like the last 2 weeks when you have all of the ranked games played. But this is just kind of like a toss-up. Let's just throw our rankings out there. Let's see what happens. But it all depends on these high-ranked games between conference play.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm very curious to see how much these change. All right, that's all we've got for today. We'll see you guys next week. This is like basically the start of the climax of the college football season, which I think is one of the most fun parts before championship season. So we'll see you guys next week. Hopefully, I know you guys probably noticed that there's no video. There will hopefully be video next week. So we'll see. But yeah, see ya.